Renewed tension, the rhetorical escalation between Washington and Caracas. The diplomatic atmosphere between the United States and Venezuela underwent a new and intense heating up this Monday, marked by a direct exchange of verbal hostilities between Presidents Donald Trump and Nicolás Maduro. The setting for the North American leader's most recent statement was the White House in Washington, during an official ceremony. The event, whose main agenda was the announcement of a new class of warships, ultimately served as a stage for Trump to send a blunt and threatening message to the Venezuelan mandatory, reigniting the geopolitical tensions that have surrounded the relationship between the two nations for years. During the event, Donald Trump did not mince words when addressing Venezuela's political situation, explicitly suggesting that Nicolás Maduro's permanence in power is unsustainable from Washington's perspective. When questioned by the press present about his administration's intentions regarding a possible regime change in Caracas, the American president opted for the rhetoric of an ultimatum. He stated categorically that the most sensible and smart attitude Maduro could take at this moment would be to tender his immediate resignation, abandoning the command of the South American country. Trump's declaration went beyond a mere diplomatic suggestion, carrying within it a tone of severe warning regarding Maduro's future should he decide to resist international pressure. The United States president emphasized that the final choice lies with the Venezuelan leader, but made it clear that options are narrowing. According to Trump, Maduro's insistence on remaining in office and confronting American determination, what he described as playing tough, would result in definitive and fatal consequences for his government, insinuating that there would be no second chance after this confrontation. The exact phrase uttered by Trump, "If he wants to play tough, it will be the last time," resonates as a veiled threat of intervention or an unprecedented hardening of sanctions and coercive measures against the Caracas regime. This choice of words suggests that the White House's patience is running out and that the United States would be willing to escalate its actions to ensure Maduro's exit if the path of voluntary resignation is not adopted. The aggressive rhetoric reflects the maximum pressure policy that has characterized Trump's approach toward geopolitical adversaries in the hemisphere. The context of the statement is symbolic, occurring precisely during the announcement of the strengthening of American naval power, with the unveiling of ships that will bear President Trump's own name. The juxtaposition between the display of military force and the threats directed at Venezuela serves to amplify the message of power and determination of the United States. For international observers, the moment chosen for the comment was not accidental, but rather a calculated demonstration of force, designed to intimidate the Venezuelan leadership and signal to allies and adversaries alike the American willingness to use its resources to shape the regional political landscape. On the other side of the spectrum, Nicolás Maduro's reaction was not long in coming, maintaining the pattern of confrontation that defines the relationship between the two countries. The Venezuelan president, accustomed to being the target of Washington's rhetoric, responded with irony and direct criticism of Trump's management. Maduro used the opportunity to deflect focus from the Venezuelan crisis and point to internal problems in the United States, suggesting that the American president should prioritize the issues of his own country instead of interfering in the sovereignty of foreign nations. In his retort, Maduro jabbed at Trump, declaring that the American leader would be better off and would run a more efficient government if he dedicated his energy and attention to the domestic challenges afflicting the United States population. This response tactic is common in Chavista discourse, which frequently accuses the North American empire of attempting to destabilize Venezuela to cover up its own failures and internal crises. Maduro thus seeks to delegitimize Trump's moral authority to dictate the course of Venezuelan politics. This Monday's exchange of barbs is merely the most recent chapter in a long saga of misunderstandings and diplomatic conflicts. The relationship between Caracas and Washington has deteriorated progressively, with the United States imposing a series of severe economic sanctions aimed at financially asphyxiating Maduro's government and forcing a political transition. Trump's statements reinforce that this strategy is not only active but could be intensified at any moment, depending on the reaction and behavior of the Venezuelan government in the coming days. The suggestion of resignation made by Trump touches on the central point of the impasse: the legitimacy of Maduro's government, which is contested by the United States and dozens of other countries around the world. For the White House, Maduro's exit is the sine qua non condition for the restoration of democracy and the economic recovery of Venezuela. However, for Chavismo, remaining in power is seen as a matter of national resistance and defense of the Bolivarian revolution against foreign interventionism, creating a zero-sum game scenario where there seems to be no room for negotiation. The expression, "playing tough," used by Trump can be interpreted in various ways, from a refusal to negotiate to the intensification of internal repression in Venezuela. The warning that this would be the last time carries an ominous weight, suggesting that the United States could be considering options that go beyond traditional diplomacy. This generates apprehension in the international community, which fears that an escalation in the conflict could lead to even greater destabilization in the South American region, with unpredictable consequences for neighboring countries. For his part, by advising Trump to focus on the USA, Maduro attempts to dialogue with the American president's opposition base and with international public opinion that criticizes Washington's interventionism. The Venezuelan leader seeks to paint himself as a victim of imperialist persecution, a David fighting against a Goliath, a narrative that still finds an echo in certain sectors of the global left and among Venezuela's strategic allies, such as Russia, China, and Iran, who are watching the unfolding of this dispute closely. Trump's insistence on Maduro's resignation reflects Washington's frustration with the resilience of the Venezuelan regime, which has managed to stay in power despite years of diplomatic isolation and economic collapse. The American strategy of supporting opposition leaders and creating an internationally recognized parallel government did not result in Maduro's immediate fall, leading the Trump administration to maintain a rhetoric of constant threat as a way to keep psychological pressure on Venezuela's high military and political command. The scenario described in the report evidences the total absence of constructive dialogue channels between the two nations. Instead of diplomacy, what is seen as megaphone diplomacy, where messages are sent through aggressive public statements and veiled threats. This environment of mutual hostility hinders any attempt at international mediation and perpetuates the impasse, leaving the Venezuelan population in the crossfire of a geopolitical dispute of major proportions. The mention of the smartest thing to do, according to Trump, denotes a pragmatic and cynical view of politics. The idea that Maduro should realize his position is indefensible in the long run and leave before he is forced to do so in a traumatic manner. However, Maduro's logic of political survival operates under different parameters, where resignation is viewed as treason or political suicide, and resistance is the only bargaining chip he has left to maintain the cohesion of his support base. Maduro's response also serves to reinforce his internal image as a strong leader who does not bow before threats from the world's greatest military power. By publicly rebutting Trump, he attempts to demonstrate control and sovereignty, messages essential to maintaining the loyalty of the Venezuelan armed forces, which are the fundamental pillars sustaining his government. Anti-imperialist rhetoric continues to be a vital tool for the legitimation of the official discourse in Caracas. The event at the White House, with military pomp and the christening of ships, served as the perfect backdrop for the projection of power desired by Trump. By associating his name with new war vessels and, in the same breath, threatening a foreign head of state, Trump fuses his personal image with the force of the American state. This personalizes the conflict, transforming the geopolitical dispute into a duel of egos and wills between two populist leaders with diametrically opposed governing styles, but who are equally confrontational. The consequences mentioned by Trump remain vague, which is a deliberate tactic to maintain uncertainty. It could mean anything from a total naval blockade, clandestine operations, to more aggressive international legal actions against regime figures. Ambiguity is a strategic weapon, intended to make Maduro's allies calculate whether the cost of keeping him in power is worth the risk of facing the full wrath of the United States. Meanwhile, the suggestion that Maduro should worry more about Venezuela sounds, to many critics, like irony coming from Trump, given the grave humanitarian crisis plaguing the Caribbean country. However, in the logic of the clash, each side accuses the other of being the cause of the Venezuelan people's suffering. Trump blames Maduro's incompetence and corruption, while Maduro blames the sanctions and economic blockade imposed by Trump. In summary, this Monday's exchange of declarations did not substantially alter the reality on the ground, but served to reaffirm the antagonistic positions and the depth of the abyss separating Washington and Caracas. The inflamed rhetoric on both sides indicates that there is no forecast for a thaw in relations in the short term, and that the strategy of confrontation will continue to be the dominant tone. The episode closes as yet another tense chapter in the recent history of the Americas, where diplomacy gives way to threats and foreign policy is conducted through ultimatums. With Trump promising that any new provocation will be the last, and Maduro entrenched in his narrative of resistance, the future of relations between the United States and Venezuela remains uncertain, volatile, and dangerously close to a definitive breaking point.